Shakespeare's legacy. We hope you've had a chance to see one of 235 verified copies of Shakespeare's first folio as part of the exhibit over in Special Collections. If you've not yet made it over after today's talk, would be a great time to drop by. As many of you probably know, the first folio includes 36 Shakespeare plays, 18 of which had never been printed before in 1623. Without Shakespeare's fellow actors putting together the first folio 7 years after his death, plays like Macbeth, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, and As You Like It might have been lost forever. Many people have made this touring exhibition possible, including the Folger Shakespeare Library, the American Library Association, the Cincinnati Museum, the National Endowment for the Humanities, Google, and other generous sponsors. We would also like to acknowledge campus facilities for creating the perfect climate for the folio, and all the scholars, actors, and musicians making 15 events possible like this one today. Please check our brochure and website to learn more about all the activities we have in store, from scholarly lectures to performances to musical performances. We've added a musical performance on the 25th, on Sunday the 25th, in this room. I am delighted to introduce today Professor Stephen Brown and thank him for speaking. Professor Brown is a professor of rhetoric and composition in UNLV's English department and a UNLV Barrick Distinguished Scholar. His book, Words in the Wilderness, which blended pedagogical theory with reflections on his time teaching on an Athabascan Indian reservation in Alaska, won the W. Ross Winterrode Award for the best book in composition theory. He has also written on Marcel Proust and most recently on Socrates and Frere. Today he'll be taking us into the world of Henry Clay Folger and Emily Jordan Folger and their quest to collect copies of Shakespeare's first folio. We're fortunate to have him addressing us today. Professor Brown.
Thank you, and thank you, Priscilla, for the wonderful introduction and for everything you've done on behalf of this exhibit and for the invitation to come and talk to you today. He walked into Bang's auction gallery in Manhattan feeling fear and trepidation. As an undergrad at Amherst, he had studied literature, including Shakespeare, whose plays he had read far into the night. He saved every book he ever read, was a diligent scrapbook keeper, but his hoarder's impulse was still in search of a grand obsession. Folger's career as a collector of the rarest of books is proof of the old adage that we are indeed possessed by the books we possess. Thus begins the entwined careers of a playwright, a printer, and a philanthropist, as told in this wonderful book, The Millionaire and the Bard, Andrea May's anecdotal account of Folger's grand obsession, from which I will be quoting throughout today's talk. Today, the first folio is the most valuable book in the world, one of which recently sold at Christie's for more than $6 million. And considered second only in importance to the King James Bible. Published in London just under 4 centuries ago, the book revolutionized the language, the psychology, and the culture of Western civilization. It rescued from oblivion no less than 18 of Shakespeare's plays, half is canon, which otherwise would have been lost forever, joining the ranks of the majority of Aristotle's manuscripts. Adding to the rarity of the book is that no two are alike, each having its own typographical fingerprint, binding, and provenance. That wonderful phrase that evokes the folio's history and time, whose sense of enchantment perhaps benefits from its association in our ear with the name of that exotic region of southern France, Provence. Each folio takes us to its own Provence in time. The first folio, like theater itself, is really a monument to the art of collaboration and the collaboration of two artists, two Williams, Shakespeare and Jaeger, the playwright of rare dramas and the publisher of rare books. It is a monument as well to Shakespeare's collaborators, John Heminges and Henry Condell, who commissioned the great work, who compiled the plays from their sources, and who ultimately lie entombed within the folio, not only with Shakespeare and the other players, but with Macbeth and Hamlet, Beatrice and Benedict, Romeo and Juliet. As if in a literary vault worthy of the kings and queens entombed in Westminster Abbey. Hemingway, though a competent actor, was limited by a stutter and fulfilled perhaps his greatest role with the troupe as its administrator. Like many of the players, Hemingway and Condell were family men. Between them, they had 23 children. The creation of the first folio was a labor of love, if there ever was one, a not-for-profit monument to the life, spirit, and genius of their fellow player, and a testament to how well beloved he was by them as an actor, a playwright, and a person. Hemingway and Condell's source material has bedeviled scholars for centuries, and is one of the greatest mysteries surrounding the first folio, proving as fugitive as the provenance of many first folios. Not a single original of Shakespeare's plays written in his own hand survives. In this regard, the fate of Renaissance manuscripts are like the silent films of our own recent past. When one is discovered, it is like the second coming of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Though not a single original handwritten manuscript survives from the plays of Shakespeare, Marlowe, or Kidd, hope yet springs eternal. Recall that recently an old suitcase was found by one of Hemingway's descendants, stuffed with the unbound pages he typed in a closet of Sloppy Joe's saloon in Key West after marlin fishing and tossing down several scotches at the bar. The pages tossed over his head and onto the floor with the same abandon as the scotch. Recall as well the discovery in the 1920s of James Boswell's considerable archives, unceremoniously packed away in the haylofts and croquet boxes of his descendants at Malahide Castle in Ireland and Fettercairn House in Scotland, now housed in the rare book collection of Yale. The discovery contains some 15,000 items, including 6,000 of Boswell's letters, the journals he kept for 30 years, and the original manuscripts of the life of Johnson and Tour to the Hebrides. So perhaps somewhere out there in some dusty English attic, perhaps behind a picture frame or behind the binding of a book, may yet hide a fragment of one of Shakespeare's original manuscripts. Perhaps somewhere in England's set high on a dusty shelf in a private library at a remote country estate, there lies an old forgotten leather portfolio stuffed with hundreds of manuscripts, pages and quartos, hand-marked with strikeouts and emendations, the long-lost hoard of Hemingway's and Condell's sources of the first folio. It is estimated that a complete handwritten manuscript of one of Shakespeare's great plays would fetch $20 million at auction. A word about the paper used to create the first folio. Paper was an expensive product during the Renaissance, so much in demand that the pages of a disbound first folio were once used in Spain to wrap fish, perhaps in revenge for the fate of the Spanish Armada. This old paper proved imperishable. One manuscript was recycled as stiffener within a book binding, where it survived for 9 centuries, until found during the dissection and conservation of the volume, an obscure religious tract from the 7th century, the oldest known surviving manuscript in England. Perhaps during the rebinding of an old book from Shakespeare's era, one of his original manuscripts might yet be found, even if only as an immortal fragment, an iridescent shard of an abalone shell washed ashore after centuries at sea. The paper began as handmade Normandy rags, which was cleaned, bleached, soaked, and boiled in quicklime, producing this liquid stuff that was then drained and dried on felt by the paper makers. Prior to printing, the paper was creased down the middle to make it easier to drape when drying. The workers used a long-handled wooden paddle to hang the wet sheets as though draping bed sheets over a clothesline. One wonders if this might be the origin of the phrase dangling modifier. To make the printed text read correctly from left to right, the letters were composed backwards by a compositor. Meticulous detective work has allowed scholars to identify which sets of hands composed which pages of a folio, thanks to the idiosyncratic errors of a particular compositor. What a job title, compositor. What do you do for a living, sir? I'm a compositor. Really? Then why aren't you wearing a wig or working in a barrister's gown? Is your British compositor Shakespeare's answer to the Grand Inquisitor of the Spanish Renaissance? One making books as fast as the other burns them? Publishing Shakespeare's plays in folio size resulted in a 900-page volume measuring 9 by 13 inches. It could not have been printed in a smaller format and still be contained in a single volume. The print run of approximately 750 first folios took 2 years to create and 9 years to sell out. Of the original 750, over 500 have disappeared. Among the 18 plays rescued from oblivion, never before seen in print, were some of the playwright's greatest: Macbeth, Taming of the Shrew, Antony and Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night. For the first time in the history of English literature, an author's portrait became the central feature of the title page. Of all his folios, no portrait is as fresh and brilliant as that of the Augustine Vincent first folio, leading scholars to think it may have been the first to be sewn and bound. Indeed, William Jager's production of the first folio was halted by production of another folio-sized book by his dear friend and worthy defender, Augustine Vincent, who would come to Jager's rescue, defending him against accusations of incompetence with a brief so withering it gained Jager's acquittal and earned Vincent Jager's everlasting gratitude. Vincent's folio was titled A Discovery of Errors in the Catalogue of Nobility, a book intent on setting the record straight with respect to British nobility, even as his public and vigorous defense of Jager would set the record straight regarding the integrity and nobility of the printer's craft. Ralph Brooke, Jager's accuser, was a member of the College of Arms at Herald College who objected to the coat of arms given to Shakespeare, publishing a book that defamed Jager, citing, quote, diverse faults and many mistakings of the rascally printer, unquote. Augustine Vincent, the state official charged with control over the issuance of heraldic arms, was outraged by Brooke's defamatory book. His rejoinder was published by Jager, who was eager to repay Brooke's offense. In taking Brooke to task, Vincent did not mince any words. Quote, your own intolerable arrogance and pride of conceit, your vilifying and contempt of others, your familiar vein of detracting from the worthiest of men, your tongue gliding over no man's name, but that it leaves a slime behind it. Pretty colorful use of the English language. In gratitude for restoring his reputation, Jager presented Vincent with one of the earliest bound copies of the first folio with its fresh and brilliant portrait of Shakespeare, bound in calfskin, embossed with Vincent's coat of arms. Jager died before the gift could be presented, so Vincent inscribed the title page in his own hand, Ex Dono Willie Jager, Typography 1623. Identifying the folio as a gift from the printer. Having passed from Jager's hand to Vincent, this most singular of all first folios vanished for the next 278 years. The birth of Shakespeare's immortality was not coincidental with the publication of the first folio, but lies yet another 140 years into the future. After the publication of the second, the third, and the fourth folios, all wrongly thought to be superior to the first, contributing to the disappearance of the first folio. The Bodleian Library, for example, sold their first folio for £24 and shelved the third folio in its place, a first folio whose surprising provenance would come to light 250 years later when it surfaced. The third folio is considered the rarest by virtue of its quantity rather than its quality, for many copies were destroyed in the Great London Fire of 1666. Only the dispersal of the first folio throughout England and Europe by that time saved many of them from the same fate. Our story now shifts from the origins of the first folio forward 2 3/4 centuries to the turn of the 19th century, the great Gilded Age of American business. The world of rare book collectors was dominated by a handful of colorful personalities, none more eccentric than Bella DaCosta Green, the exotic secretary of J. Pierpont Morgan. It also included Folger's arch rivals, Henry Huntington and Marsden Perry. Folger's preferred modus operandi was to have his agents with Southern and Company in London discover the identities of folio owners, usually British aristocrats, then approach them before they went to auction. He insisted on secrecy throughout the entire process in order to keep the price from being inflated and to minimize competition from his wealthy rivals for whom money was likewise no obstacle. He was helped greatly in tracking down these aristocratic owners by the census of first folios compiled at the turn of the century by Thomas Frognall Digby. Yes, I did say Thomas Frognall Digby. And Sidney Lee, the celebrated Shakespearean scholar. Lee located 156 first folios. Only 4 books have ever been the subject of such a census. The Gutenberg Bible, 1455, Copernicus's On the Revolution of Heavenly Spheres, 1543, Darwin's Origin of Species, and James Audubon's Birds of America. Folger kept Lee's census within reach for the rest of his life. In 1899, the grandest of all Folger's folio hunts began with the discovery by Alexander Railton of Southern & Company of a most extraordinary and hitherto unknown first folio. Its rare provenance and handwritten inscription revealed multiple connections to Shakespeare's contemporaries. Railton's description to Folger of his finding of the rare folio ranks with the discovery of Boswell's journals. His own words are worth revisiting. Quote, in April 1899, I was engaged on behalf of my firm in weeding out the worthless books of the library of Mr. Coningsby Charles Sibthorpe of Canwick Hall, whose lineage stretched back to the Norman Conquest. I was taken to the coach house, in which was a very large case of books, on top of which were stacked a great number of old folios covered with dust. These were being thrown down to me by an assistant who lived on the estate. On throwing down a volume which lacked a cover, had many leaves and tatters, and was tightly wound with a rough piece of cord, he remarked, "This is no good, sir, it's only old poetry." I unloosened the strings, opened the book, and at a glance saw what a treasure was found. I took the first folio to London, supplied several missing leaves from another copy, had it restored as nearly as possible to its state in which it was originally presented by Jagger the printer. On hearing these words presented by Jagger the printer, Folger realized the discovery was unlike any folio ever found. In nearly 3 centuries, no presentation copy of a first folio had ever been discovered. The volume contained a handwritten inscription in ink dated 1623 and in an embossed coat of arms. The cord-bound parcel unceremoniously tossed down to Railton in the coach house of Coningsby Sigthorpe was none other than the Augustine Vincent First Folio, surfacing after nearly 3 centuries. The pages had never been trimmed. Its status as the tallest known folio, combined with its stunning provenance and the likelihood that it was one of the first copies to be bound, made it the most important and coveted first folio in the world. The bad news was that it was not for sale by Coningsby Sibthorpe. As he told Mr. Railton, quote, "In the book we shall always have a treasure to look at." Then Railton dropped the bombshell that Sidney Lee had also heard of the folio's discovery and published an article about it. Now the whole world was in on the secret. When approached by Southern & Company, Sibthorpe announced what he thought was to be at a prohibitive price, £5,000, approximately $25,000, far and above the highest amount ever paid for a book to that date. The folio was also now regarded in England as a national treasure. Undeterred, Folger made an offer through Railton of £4,000. To Coningsby Charles Sibthorpe, bargaining over money was ungentlemanly. Insulted by Folger's counteroffer, he turned it down. Folger, failing to grasp the nuanced social codes of English aristocracy, countered with a second offer of £4,500. Railton declined to forward Folger's offers, not wishing to further insult the temperamental owner. Instead, he offered the asking price of £5,000. Shortly thereafter, he received a letter. Sibthorpe had agreed to sell the Vincent Folio for £5,000. Then Folger, through rash and reckless behavior, set in motion a reversal of fortune that undid his triumph. He received via a third party a report that listed the folio's faults, including the assertion that several pages were facsimiles. Now Folger assumed the part of the injured party, insisting in writing on a monetary allowance for the necessary replacements. Sibthorpe's position hardened. Take it or leave it. Folger now insisted on examining the folio in person before agreeing to finalize a sale, promising to cross the Atlantic to do so. This was too much for Sibthorpe, who returned Folger's deposit and removed the folio from sale. The most coveted folio in the world had slipped through Folger's fingers. He realized too late he had negotiated badly, had mishandled Sibthorpe. The lesson he learned was a harsh one. In defeat, however, he became even more desperate to possess the Vincent folio. Not wishing to lose such a valued client, Sutherland & Company returned to the fray on Folger's behalf, renewing their courtship of Coningsby Sibthorpe as discreetly and tactfully as possible. Meanwhile, Sidney Lee had wrangled an invitation from Sibthorpe to view the rare folio. The news struck Folger like a dagger to the heart. He urged his agent to up the offer to £6,000. This was no longer a business transaction, but a competitive courtship. Again, Sutherland advised that the situation required tact and patience, not the crude bludgeon of more money. Yet again, Coningsby Sibthorpe turned down Folger's offer. In the meantime, English prejudice against American collectors had intensified in what was tantamount to a culture war between American triumphalism and English traditionalism. In the wake of his defeat, Folger turned his attention to another folio gem in the collection of the banking heiress Baroness Burdett Coutts. Alas, it too turned out not to be for sale. 2 years passed. Then suddenly the Vincent folio was back in play. Sibthorpe offered to sell it to one of Folger's arch rivals, Marsden Perry of Rhode Island, for what Folger had last offered, £6,000, about $30,000. When Sutherland informed Folger of this sudden turn of events, Folger's folio mania reached new heights. He cabled his dealer to offer £10,000, approximately $50,000, the highest price ever offered for a book. 5 days later, the dealer cabled back, bought for £10,000, payable within 10 days. Coningsby Charles Sibthorpe had surrendered to the almighty dollar, 50,000 of them to be exact. Folger had done it. After 4 years of torturous and delicate negotiations with the temperamental English noble, the Vincent folio was now his. Though only his seventh first folio, it was to be his finest, rarest, and favorite. Of Folger's 80 first folios, the Vincent is designated as F1. He sailed to England and retrieved it himself. It would be but one of 11 first folios to make the passage from England to America between 1902 and 1906. Speaking of the folio's unique provenance and aura of enchantment, Folger would say this: "We are carried back at once nearly 300 years to the splendors and struggles of the reigns of Elizabeth and James, when poets sang a glorious note, full-throated, blah, blah, blah." Shortly thereafter, Henry Huntington purchased the prize of the whole collection, the Gutenberg Bible, for $50,000. He followed this triumph with another, purchasing the Duke of Devonshire's entire library of 4,000 volumes, including a copy of each of the 4 folios, for a cool $1 million. By now, Folger was president of Standard Oil. His vast collection of Elizabethan literary antiquities was stored in New York warehouses. Yet he had never enjoyed the pleasure of seeing it all at the same time under one roof. His and Emily's attention now turned to building a fitting monument to house the collection. He and Emily settled on a block-long site in Washington, D.C., just behind Congress, Grants Row, containing 14 houses, all privately owned. One by one, Folger purchased them over the next 10 years or so, spending a total of $300,000. Then came another happy bombshell. Christie's announced the long-coveted collection of Baroness Burdett Coutts, containing one of the finest extant first folios, would be up for auction. Folger succumbed to a fresh bout of folio mania, cabling his dealer to offer £12,000. The heiress declined, preferring to go to auction. In a bidding war that would set a new world record for a book, Folger claimed ownership of the prize folio. England mourned the loss. caricaturing him in a satiric cartoon as Autolycus, a character out of Greek mythology renowned for skills of theft and trickery, a kind of Hellenic trickster figure. By now, Folger was chairman of the board of Standard Oil. The collection was moved from its New York warehouses to a new library and filled 2,000 crates. It took a convoy of armored trucks 6 months to transport. Not to be overlooked by Folger's singular collection of first folios is the mass of Shakespearean antiquities, playbills, letters, and manuscripts of Renaissance England he gathered over a lifetime of literary sleuthing. They are still being cataloged as we speak. In addition to containing 1/3 of the world's known copies of the first folio, 80, the collection boasted 250,000 books, 60,000 manuscripts, 50,000 watercolors, and 500,000 playbills, plus theater programs, musical instruments, costumes, and more. Folger did not live to see the grand opening, dying of a pulmonary embolism after a second prostate surgery on June 11, 1930. The folios are housed in an underground treasure vault off limits to all but the staff and a select group of readers whose scholarly credentials have earned them a place in the library's inner circle, like the members of some secret occult society. The Vincent folio, purchased for $50,000, is now estimated to be worth 100 times that amount, based on the recent sale of the Williams folio for $5.2 million. Another recent discovery helps explain why hope springs eternal in the world of rare book collecting, for recently in a small library in northern France, a first folio was discovered, authenticated for the world by our esteemed colleague and chair of the English department at UNR, Eric Rasmussen, who will be here on Sunday, as I recall. Folger's dealer, Southern and Company, is still in business, having recently celebrated its 250th anniversary. At the east end of the main reading room in the Folger Library hang the portraits of Emily and Henry Folger. Between the portraits is a passageway that leads to a hidden staircase that rises to a balcony overlooking the old reading room. If you've ever been to Dublin National Library, immortalized by James Joyce and Ulysses, and that scene of Stephen Dedalus' disquisition on Hamlet, you come to realize that these old reading rooms are like literary cathedrals. The hidden passageway ends at a door with a plaque, which opens into a niche where lie the mortal remains of Emily and Henry Folger. They remain the only American philanthropists entombed within their creation, like Dandolo entombed in his marble crypt at St. Mark's in Venice. I find it fitting that they should lie in the monument housing the book that is a monument to Shakespeare's art, a monument within a monument that forever joins the souls of the creator and his greatest collector. In the end, both are entombed in their creations. The first folio has been called the Eurotext of modernism, the inscription that bears the imprint of mankind's modern soul. That is its heraldic shield, its cue for language and thought in the modern world, and the manner in which our thought is to this day shaped by his language. As Harold Bloom rightly observes, Shakespeare not only shaped the consciousness of his age, but ours. Today, few people realize how close the world came to losing half of Shakespeare's plays forever, which at the time of his death in April 1616 existed only in pirated, corrupted forms, not destined to outlive his generation. How impoverished the world and our Western culture would be in particular, but for the timely salvation of this timeless art from oblivion by two of his fellow players. If you walk down the hall and around the corner into our own collections room, you will find in the center of the room the first folio housed in glass, open to Hamlet's to be or not to be speech, whose identity and provenance is a closely guarded secret to deter art thieves. If you look to your left, you will find a second folio against the wall, which you can peruse digitally from beginning to end, from its immortal front matter to its final page. On the very first page, written in faded pencil, is the number 68. I may be wrong, but I believe this to be the wonderful folio known as the Daniel copy, purchased from Baroness Coutts for just under $40,000, the fifth most expensive in the entire collection. And with that, I bid you, fair readers, to do as John Hemingway and Henry Condell urged 400 years ago, to go and have a look, not in this picture, but in his book. And allow yourselves to be possessed, if only for a few minutes, by that mania that inspired its creation by William Shakespeare, its printing by William Jager, and its preservation by Henry Clay Folger. Happy maniacs, one and all. Thank you. Before we entertain your questions, I'll run the slideshow and walk you through the images here. If I can get it to work. Okay, this is, of course, the front matter in the folio with this list of all of the plays. This is Hemingway's and Condell's letter or note to the reader, the list of the players of his troupe, signed by Hemingway's and Condell. And of course, you see the marvelous layout of his plays. These are images of the process by which the folio was made with the engravers and the paper makers. Here you see an image of the paper makers with the big vat and draping it, folding it. Another shot of the engravers. It took 2 years to produce the run of 750. This is a picture of the young Henry Clay Folger's wife, Emily. This is Folger in his prime, probably when he's president of Standard Oil. This is Folger in his later years, chairman of the board. And this is, of course, the caricature of him in the English press as this dastardly thief of English culture. And of course, the article where he buys a Daniel copy for £8,000, just a little under $40,000. This is the casket in which it was housed, which he also bought. Again, it's now listed as F5 out of the 80. This is the Baroness Burdett Coutts. And of course, this is the folio that's just around the corner, whose identity is a well-kept secret, which will be revealed apparently when the tour is over, and we hope to hear from Washington, D.C., which one this is. This is the one, if you look at it digitally, the very first page, you see the number 68. And it just leads me to believe that this may very well be at least a digital version of the Danielle folio from Baroness von Coutts. This is, of course, Emily Folger, and these are the portraits that hang in the reading room at the Folger Library. This is, of course, now for those of you who've been up to Cedar City, the Shakespeare Festival, you see these wonderful sculptures of Shakespeare around the grounds up there. We just opened the theater this year. It's a wonderful venue. this is one of my favorite Shakespearean actors, Henry Warnowitz. First saw about 30 years ago on the stage in Ashland in the role of Henry V. He's also played it here, and then he came back here just a few years ago directing one of the Shakespeare plays. This is another one of my favorite. This Tony Amendola, you may recognize from Tony Award-winning Merchant of Venice on television. He played the same role. I mean, he was here last year as King Lear, one of the most profound performances of Lear I've ever seen. And of course, Shakespeare was meant to be seen, not read, and this is the medium in which he created all of his plays for. And it's that wonderful three-dimensional medium of acting and the theater. This is the new theater up there where just recently, from Marty, we saw this, probably the best version of Henry V I've ever seen. Of course, there's the cast at the end of that. This was its closing night in the outdoor theater. But if not for that folio, we might not even have the privilege of seeing these plays. Okay, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Anybody have a question? I'm no expert on the folios, but still be glad to entertain any questions. Maybe Priscilla as well, if could.
Yes, I was just wondering, you say, okay, the folio is a definitive version of the plays as opposed to other versions, but how do we know that? I mean, how do you define definitive?
There's no way of knowing, not having their sources.
Yeah.
We can never say anything is definitive. We could only determine that if we were to find the sources that they based.
No, but I mean, you did say
on.
that, so that's why I'm asking you.
Pardon me?
You said it was the definitive version, so that's my question is, why did you say
that? The first folio?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's the best we have, the closest, but I think in the absence of the actual sources, we don't know for sure if even those plays that, you know, came in the folio, but I mean, it is the closest you'll ever get to his original manuscripts. Yes?
Initially you mentioned a folio 3, 4, something like that. What was that? Were the different editions?
Yes, yes. After the first folio sold out, they produced a second one, and then a third one, and a fourth one over the next 80 years. These were considered to be all superior at the time to the first folio, but time has proven that none of them were of the quality of the first folio. But because they were considered to be better, they were more valued, and so it led to the loss of some of the first folios. But in quality, generally, scholars and experts of the first folio, and I'm sure Eric Rasmussen would speak to this point, consider the first folio to be superior to the others as far as the quality of it. And,
so is it just the quality or the collectability value of the first folio which really makes the headlines?
Yeah, I think it's generally considered to be the most valuable price-wise because of the quality of it. The third is the rarest in numbers, and so that affects its value. But this wonderful book by Andrea Mays goes into detail about what distinguishes the first from the second and third and the fourth. And I'd highly recommend reading it. It's just called The Millionaire and the Bard. And it's absolutely, compelling read, and very anecdotal but in-depth comparison of the...
And you also said something like 500 of them disappeared. Or what was that?
Well, out of 750 originally, about 500 have disappeared. About 230 are known to exist, and but just when you think that we won't find any more, one turns up in a little library in northern France just last year, and of all people in the world that could have authenticated, they come to one of our own professors, Eric Rasmussen at the University of Reno, who authenticated it as one of the first folios. And as I mentioned, the Williams folio just sold for $5.2 million. So, you know, Folger bought his Vincent folio, which is one of the rarest in the world. He paid $50,000, would easily sell for $5 or $6 million today. Just as they said, if one of his original manuscripts in his own writing ever turns up, it would probably be auctioned for around $20 million. Mm-hmm.
I thought there were a couple of plays not found in the first folio, and if that's true, what's our source for them? What's the, quote, definitive source for the plays that aren't in the first folio, if I'm correct?
Yeah, I can't answer that. I wish I knew the answer to that. I don't.
But there are a couple not in there, is that not correct?
As far as I know, they are, all of them are in the folio, but I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm no expert on the first folio. That may be the case. I can't say definitively.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Professor Brown. Thank
My
you
pleasure.
so much for coming today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.